Chapter 13. She heard Jackson Jones calling after her, but Katie didn't stop. Her flight had been unthinking, propelled only by sheer panic, and it was only when she'd begun to feel winded that she realized she'd run in the opposite direction from the boy with the big dog, the boy who might be Eric. She turned and looked back, hoping that by some miracle the boy had turned too and was approaching her. There was no one, however, no one at all. No one was chasing her. Would Mrs. Jones call the police? Katie had to assume that she would, which meant that Katie would have to find a place to go, a place to hide. Yet she couldn't hide forever. Maybe she couldn't even hide for a day or two. Jackson Jones thought she ought to contact her mother because Monica was worried about her. Only, was she worried because she thought Katie was dangerous, or because she wanted to protect her? Katie's instinct was to keep on running, but she had a stitch in her side, and she was breathing heavily through her mouth. She couldn't run anymore for a while, so instead, she walked. She didn't take the bus, although she had a few coins left in her pocket, and eventually she came to a place where things looked familiar. She was only a block from Dale Casey's house. Could he help her? Probably not, Casey decided. She didn't even think he would be home, but he was the only hope she had. If he really was like she was, and she was convinced that he was, then he would at least understand about her, and that was more than anyone else had ever done. The Casey house sat in the middle of the block, looking normal and not at all frightening. Yet, after the way Mrs. Casey had yelled, "Stop that child!" at her husband, Katie was very leery of approaching it again. She stood, pressing a hand to her side, trying to think. After a few minutes, it occurred to her that a car was sitting in front of the house, the car Mr. Casey had driven up in when Katie was there. Of course, that didn't prove anything. Some families had more than one car. But maybe the Caseys had come home early. Maybe Dale was around. Katie did something then that she'd never tried before. She reached out with her mind into that house. She didn't know what it was like inside, nor where Dale would be if he were home. But she sent currents of air moving, air that would give the curtains and draperies a life of their own. If there were papers lying loose, they too would shift position. If she'd known which room Dale was in, she would have flung a few small stones against the windows as well. Dale had indicated that he could read minds. Could he read hers, from half a block away, if she tried very hard to catch his attention? She stood there in the warm summer sunshine until her upper lip was beaded with perspiration. Lots of people had ESP. She knew that. She'd read about it often. So maybe if Dale had a little more than ordinary people, he would feel that she was there. She tried so hard that she squeezed her eyes shut and held her breath until it suddenly exploded in a small gasp when she couldn't hold it any longer. Katie opened her eyes, and there he was coming out of the front door of the big house. He paused on the front steps, looking around very casually, as if he had come out for nothing more important than to see what the weather was like. And then, without looking at her at all, he crossed the street and walked in Katie's general direction. For a moment, she thought it was just coincidence that he'd emerged from the house while she waited, because if he stayed on the far side of the street, his path wouldn't cross hers. After a moment, though, she realized he might be taking precautions in case anyone was watching. When he was almost opposite her, Katie turned and went around the corner so that no one from the Casey house could possibly see her. And sure enough, a moment later, she heard the padding of Dale's tennis shoes on the sidewalk behind her. It made her feel peculiar to look into those silver eyes, so different from any she'd ever seen except for her own. Peculiar and excited all at once. "Boy," Dale said, "you're sure creating a ruckus. Do you know that they showed your picture on TV last night and told people to call the police if they saw you?" Katie licked her lips. "Did they say what for?" "No." He hesitated and then blurted out, "My mom called them." "They just talked to her. They didn't send a police officer out to the house." He hesitated again before he added, "My dad picked up a piece of paper you dropped. It had some names on it, mine and 2 others. He pulled a crumpled slip out of his pocket and handed it to her. "The police wanted to know about it, but Dad couldn't remember what the names had been except for mine. He doesn't know I have it." Katie took the paper, although she didn't need it anymore. She'd memorized the names, and it didn't tell her how to find Eric Van Allsburg. "Did you read my mind?" she asked. when I wanted you to come outside?" For the first time, she saw Dale grin. It made some of his freckles disappear into the creases. "Boy, you almost overdid it. With the wind, I mean. My dad was reading the Sunday paper and it flew all over the room and knocked over a bud vase onto the letter Mom was writing, and it spilled water all over her desk." She thought maybe I did it. The grin faded. "I get blamed for everything like that, even if I don't do it at all." "But you really heard me asking you to come out?" Katie was intrigued by that. It seemed like a handy ability to have. "Not heard you exactly. I was alerted when the wind began to blow inside the house, because I used to do that sometimes before I decided it caused more trouble than it was worth. So then I sort of went looking for you, or whoever was causing the wind. Mentally. And I felt you waiting somewhere close by." "I don't know exactly why I did it," Katie confessed, "except that I didn't know what else to do. Can you read the whole story in my mind, or shall I tell you about it?" "It's easier if you tell me," Dale decided. "I can't read everybody's minds. I'm just learning, It sort of makes my head ache to try too hard or for too long." So they walked over to the park, where the same old man sat again feeding the pigeons, and they sat on the edge of the pool and talked. It was strange and exciting to talk to Dale, because it was the first time in her life that Katie had felt able to admit to anything that came into her head without being afraid of the consequences. And Dale, it was clear, was having the same experience. "They've kicked me out of 3 schools," he admitted. "They said I was a disruptive influence. Actually, I didn't do anything to anybody who didn't do something to me first. I don't know why the other kids picked on me, except that they always made remarks about my funny eyes. And one day, I realized that this kid was planning to trip me when I walked past. So I thought how neat it would be if his milk carton tipped over into his lap right then, and thinking about it seemed to make it happen. So he forgot about tripping me. And after that, I always seemed to know if they were planning something mean, and I could counteract it. Only the teacher said I caused trouble. Anyway," he concluded, "I guess being kicked out of school isn't as bad as having the police after you because they think you killed your grandmother." Katie was glad she'd found an understanding friend, but that didn't change her basic problem. She came back to it with a sigh. "Do you think you could read Mr. C's mind and find out for sure what he intends to do about me, so I'd know if I can go home or not?" Dale looked toward the fountain in the middle of the pool, and suddenly the water sprayed over his outstretched hand and arm, cooling them. When he put his hand back in his lap, the fountain returned to normal. "Well, I could try. If people don't want to let anyone know what they're thinking, it's harder. Like I said, I'm just learning." "Do you have to get close to him to do it?" "It helps. I picked you up from half a block away, but that was probably because I was looking for you, and you were trying to send a message. This Mr. Cooper won't be trying to do that." Katie was feeling very warm, so she decided to try Dale's technique with the fountain. It was actually quite easy to make the water blow over her in a fine cooling mist. "Can you send messages the way I did to you, as well as read minds?" Dale considered. "I don't know. I never tried it. There was never anybody to send a message to who wouldn't have thought he was going crazy." "Try to send me a message now," Katie suggested. So they sat there on the concrete edge of the pool, and both of them concentrated. And into Katie's mind, almost like the impressions she'd received from Lobo the cat, came an image of food, steaming hot, and a glass of cold milk. It reminded her that Mrs. Jones's pancakes had been eaten a long time ago. Katie swallowed. "I can almost smell the hamburger," she said. Dale grinned. "Me too, with onions." Katie nodded, but she knew there was something more important than eating at the moment. "If you could send me a message about the food, can you send a message to Eric? I think he saw me and realized I knew he had made the Frisbee act up. He was afraid of what I might do or say about him, so he hurried away. Can you reach him and tell him that we're friends and we need to get together?" Dale shrugged. "Never tried it, but what do we have to lose? Tell me again what he looks like, as much detail as you can remember, and I'll think about that as well as the message." So Katie told him, and Dale closed his eyes and tried to project his thoughts to the boy they had yet to meet. And on the off chance that she, too, might be able to use her mental powers in this way, Katie did the same thing. After about 10 minutes, they found they had to rest. "Sort of gives me a headache to try so hard," Dale admitted. It was Katy who saw him coming and rose slowly to her feet, the electrical trickle of excitement somehow being communicated to Dale so that he, too, turned and stood up. He came right toward them, a tall, dark-haired boy wearing glasses, carrying a white paper sack. He didn't have the dog this time, but otherwise he was the same as Katy had described, and behind the lenses of his glasses, his eyes were silver-colored. "Are you Eric?" Katy asked tentatively, though she felt quite certain that he must be. The delicious aroma of hamburgers with onions wafted from the paper sack, and she knew they'd done it. She and Dale had called up this boy they'd been searching for. Eric spoke slowly. "Then there are more like me. I always thought there must be." He handed Katy the sack, regarding her seriously with the serious silvery eyes. "I assume these are yours. How did you do it? Find me and make me buy your lunch?" "Dale did it mostly," Katy volunteered. "I saw you here in the park moving the frisbee, and I guessed who you were, only I didn't know how to find you when you ran away. Dale can read minds, though, at least some of them, and he can send messages without speaking. Can you do that too?" "Not that I know of. I've concentrated more on not letting anybody know what I was thinking, instead of the other way around." Eric studied their faces, and particularly their eyes. "I wouldn't have run if I'd been close enough to see you like this, though. I'm not telepathic enough to figure out what's going on. I'm sure of that. Is anybody going to explain?" Katy dug into her pocket for coins and a crumpled dollar bill to pay for the lunch, and then passed one of the foil-wrapped hamburgers to Dale. They ate them sitting on the edge of the fountain pool, taking turns talking. Eric wasn't eating, so he was the one who began first. "First I got this strong feeling I should come to the park," he said, "and then, after I decided maybe I ought to do it, even though I didn't know why, I felt a compulsion to stop and buy 2 hamburgers with onions. It was crazy, but I did it anyhow." Dale started to laugh. "I guess you can project as well as I can, Katy. I wasn't thinking about the food anymore." "Who are we?" Eric asked. "I decided I must have been born on some other planet, maybe brought here in a flying saucer and left for human beings to raise. I thought maybe someday the aliens, my own people, would show up and ask me to rise up against normal humans, and I'd have to decide whether to do it or not." Dale stopped chewing. "Would you go against humans? If you were an alien from outer space?" Eric considered. His dark hair had fallen forward into his eyes, and Katy noted that he made it move back into place and smooth itself out without touching it or thinking about it. "I hadn't decided. Mostly they've been pretty good to me. My folks have, anyway, even if they don't understand me." "I guess you don't think we're aliens?" So they explained to him that they thought it had something to do with the dangerous drug their mothers had worked with before any of them were born. Sometimes all 3 of them talked at the same time, but it didn't seem to matter. Nobody got confused. Katy had never felt so exhilarated in her life. And then she remembered. "The police are looking for me," she said. "They think I pushed my grandmother down the stairs. And Mr. C moved into our apartment house to try and find out things about me. I don't know for sure if he is the police, but I'm afraid to go home until I find out." "That shouldn't be too hard," Eric said. "If Dale can read minds, we can just get close enough to find out what he has in mind." "I can't read everybody's mind," Dale said, wiping his mouth on a paper napkin. He sounded apologetic. "But I can try. It does seem to help if I get close to them. Shall we go see what we can do?" Katy drew a long, shaky breath. "All right," she agreed. "Let's go."